You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I have been an entrepreneur for 13 years. I started out in the arts and entertainment scene with a company called Moonlight Cafe. The assets are ever evolving. The assets you would use in a specific market, like in Nigeria, would be different from the assets that you would use in South Africa. We're standing strong on the fact that we do transform people and transform brands to be able to get to that global stage. We also are looking to hire 25,000 African creators. We usually hire from Africa, but we might open that up later down the line. But for now, we want to make sure that we're dealing with unemployment in Africa.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Sydney Sam, who is the founder of Workspace Global, a company that believes every founder deserves to show up and compete fairly on the global stage. They achieve that by making creative teams accessible to startups. Welcome to the podcast, Sydney. How are you?
Thanks so much, my brother. I'm very well. I've been looking forward to this podcast for some time, and I'm doing it on a nice weather day. So I'm very excited to be here.
In our previous conversation, I mentioned in terms of what you're doing and how much it's needed and offering something that's very different in the startup space, especially in terms of making it accessible for the African market. So yeah, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Let's see where it takes us.
Awesome.
I know you've listened to the podcast before, but
yes,
I like to start from the beginning. So if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Sydney Sam.
Okay. All right. So my name is Sydney Scott Sam. It is a very weird alliteration that I don't know why my parents decided to pick that. I'm a 31-year-old Ghanaian. I live in different parts of the world, but currently I'm based in London with my family. I have been an entrepreneur for 13 years. I've explored a few ventures, have had my fair share of wins and losses in that space. I started out in the arts and entertainment scene with a company called Moonlight Cafe. Did okay. But it tanked at some point, and that set me on the quest or inquiry for how branding influenced the success or failure of that business. And by pursuing that, I started to really learn about the plight of founders in Africa and founders around the world and some of the challenges that they face. But also as a creative in Africa, you know, the challenges that they face of access to employment, resources, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a father and a husband. Been a husband for 4 years, and I'm a father of a 1.5-year-old. So yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
So you've given us a lovely, concise overview of your personal and professional life. You've lived in different parts of the world, entrepreneur for 13 years, experienced your wins and losses. One of the losses is what has led you to what you're doing now. So I was wondering if we can home in on that. Okay. What was it that was specific about the loss that led to the inspiration behind Workspace Global?
So that initial business called Moonlight Cafe, actually what it did was it picked underground artists and puts them on a stage. I started this in the university. So if you've ever heard the name Mr. Easy or Kitty, yes, these are people who kind of started out on that stage, and I would say was one of their early exposures to the industry. Now, that business was primarily patronized by students at the time. And, you know, the input cost for that business definitely could not be met by the students' pocket, right? So we definitely needed sponsorship support, brand partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. But we only knew how to put the show together. We didn't know how to show up in sponsorship decks, creating a corporate brand. You're just navigating that whole space of how to ensure that you're attractive enough to, you know, to large organizations or to other people so you could build those partnerships. So we ran out of cash over time because every time we would try to pitch We weren't doing it the right way. We didn't have a website. There were things that people, would ask us about that we just had not yet thought of. So when that business went down, I had personally taken it upon myself to try and understand the design element, the website element, just ask myself, what are the questions of things, what are the things that went wrong, what are the things that I could have done better? And I realized it's not just me, there are so many people who are doing interesting things, but really they only think about the operational element or the product element of what they're doing, and they don't think much about the brand element and the kind of marketing assets that they're using. And I realized they didn't even know where to start, because to get high quality versions of that, you would have to go and pay an expensive agency, or you may have to do well with freelancers, which can tend to, for consistency reasons or management reasons, it just has a lot of friction if you don't have the right freelancers, right? So we realized there was a gap in the market, especially since a lot of people also didn't want to do it themselves, because not everybody's born a designer. We realized there was a gap in the market for a high quality, readily available, very flexible support system from creative teams to startups. And that's where we made our mark, and we decided to build a product to be able to plug that hole.
Thank you for sharing that. So from your experience from the past venture and what you've learned during your time at Workspace Global, what do you believe specifically in terms of how does high quality branding and marketing allow businesses to compete fairly on the global stage, especially maybe if we look at it from the perspective of African businesses?
Yes. So, firstly, the world has become heavily globalized, right? So even though you think you're competing on a local level, there's so many alternatives to whatever you're offering from people from other countries. There's always somebody who's able to do it cheaper than you at some point, or will do it better than you in some way, right? So when you think about that, someone starting out a business just has no idea of how much competition there is. And then when they're working with potential customers, especially because now people are working with customers even beyond borders because of how digitalized the world has become, you have a very short window to make a good first impression, right? So immediately someone makes an introduction, or you reach out to someone through marketing and social media, they immediately go and check out your social media profile, check out your LinkedIn profile, check out your website. Yes. If those things don't hit, that is it. They are not having a follow-up conversation, regarding that. Especially, and I dare say this, Africa is on the rise in terms of, that the level of the world is beginning to trust the competence that we've always had for many years. But I do say we still have a bit of friction to be able to show that we can do things as well and or better than some of the people in other parts of the world. Okay. So there's a bit to prove. And I'm not saying that we need the acceptance of, external people, or just even within Africa as well. There are businesses that are always more, keen to work with certain types of companies as compared to others. So that first impression is important. Also, the way you price. If you don't show up well, you usually are not able to properly display your value. And therefore, you have the short end of the stick when it comes to pricing negotiation. So we think it's also really important that people show up properly, articulate their ideas well, so that they can get the best deal out of the bargain, especially for their first set of customers. And then as they build testimonials and credibility and a track record, it gets easier over time. So that's my general perspective, regarding that specific topic.
So leading on from that, do you believe that, I know this is a very general question, but do you believe that African businesses fully embrace and understand the importance of high quality branding and marketing?
It is a sweeping statement, I would say, but I would say across the world, actually, most businesses don't prioritize it until much later. Because of the way the startup world is right now, and everybody's thinking about raising funding, et cetera, people are more focusing on building products or, just building the idea and not necessarily how the idea is packaged. So it's usually the second or third thing that most people think about, even though they do find that it's reasonably important. It's not the first thing that they think about, right? And then they have to, kiss a few frogs, realize people reject them a number of times, and then, start to invest in that. So that's just a general trend that I'm seeing in the industry.
During the conversation so far, we've talked about branding and marketing in general terms. So maybe if you can break it down to us in terms of specifically what areas would you say are essential for startups or businesses to look at when it comes to branding and marketing?
Okay, so the first thing I always, kick off with, pulling from Simon Sinek is your why or your purpose statement. And that is basically the entire essence of your brand, right? Why are you doing this in the first place? Most people go straight into the what and then the how that they do it, but not necessarily the why. But one thing I would say is why is what connects you to your customers, what connects you to investors, it's what connects you to your staff and your partners. So that's the first thing to think about, and use that why, that purpose statement, to influence your value proposition, to influence, your competitive advantage, all of that stuff. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is the messaging and the emotion that you're trying to create regarding that. So once you know your why, then it starts to align with what you're selling, how you're selling, who you're appealing to, right? So that way you're able to articulate your value very quickly. Then it moves into the things that people experience, which has to do with the visuals, your color scheme, your logos, the general identity of the business, what makes the business stand out. Then after that, you then move into your assets. So there is a bit of a difference between your brand identity and your brand assets, because your assets are ever evolving. The assets you would use in a specific market, like in Nigeria, would be different from the assets that you would use in South Africa, right? So, you have to then build those assets specific to the different kinds of markets and different kinds of products that you have. So that includes your websites, your social media posts, your ads, your sales decks, et cetera, et cetera. And then it goes on and on and on and on. But these are the key foundations that I would share.
Great points. So yeah, I agree. Understanding your why is extremely important, which is, I assume, why over the past decade you've made substantial strides in the industry. So during that period, what would you say are the toughest challenges you faced in establishing and growing Workspace Global?
It's two ends of the same coin. The first thing is most people don't understand what we're doing or why we're doing it, and that has made adoption have a bit of friction. And then secondly, most people also assume that there's so many other people who are doing what we're doing, which has also made adoption quite difficult. So it does take a little bit of convincing for people to sign on to the platform, but when they do, they then understand what that is. And so we are at the forefront of a lot of education, saying that, listen, there's a different way to do things. Most people want to stick with a traditional agency, even though they can't afford it. I mean, there are other solutions regarding that. So the first thing I would note is that we supply creative teams, supervised creative teams on subscription. So just in case there's anyone who's listening to the call that goes like, what exactly does Workspace do? It's a technology platform that allows you to sign on, and instantly, in the way that you get your Netflix, you're instantly connected to a supervised creative team with a project manager, and they can deliver whatever you need for you. And so we have endless requests, and we say we revise until you're happy, right? So that's a beautiful thing. Now, there are a lot of other solutions out there like this, but then they are all coming from a price tag of about $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month, because they're different, they're dealing with different parts of the market. We are offering this service from about $200 a month. So every startup at least is able to make that budget to be able to embrace a service like this. Now, explaining this to people and letting them try it out, they then go like, this is amazing. Like, how has this not been there? Why are there not 10,000 people on this platform? We are getting, we're building our user base quite significantly. But yeah, so that's just generally the challenge that has been there. People confuse us and therefore assume, a lot of things about the product. And then because there are a lot of other alternatives in terms of freelancers, DIY, people like, oh, my cousin can do this, my auntie can do this for me. Everyone has, an interesting reason for that. But you see, and the interesting thing about us is that the reason it's a subscription and we're focused on your brand and not just, even though we say all your creative tasks done for you, but we help you with your brand specifically, is because your brand is never ending, right? Most people think you can do a website and then you're done. No. In 6 months, you still need things. You still need to be putting out things. You still need to stay relevant, refresh. And based on the things that you are learning, you need to be creating more things. So it's really nice to have a subscription that you can just, it gives you the flexibility to do that. You can cancel at any time or pause at any time, so you always have that access to a ready creative team. All you need to do is probably hire a marketing manager if you want, or you, the founder, just works with us, but you never need to hire a designer, a developer, a writer, a social media manager. All that is covered for you under your subscription. It gives you a lot of, potential and capacity at the click of a button, so that's just a general idea regarding that.
Yeah, you mentioned something important there in terms of your brand is ever existing, and I believe your brand is also ever evolving. You look at some of the biggest brands, such as McDonald's, the logo has evolved.
Yes.
I mean, it's kept the fundamental imagery, but if you look at the old Coca-Cola logos or the branding, that's ever evolving. So as a brand, you always need to evolve with the times and keep on kind of moving forward. So very important point. And something else that you noted is that most people don't understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, which has been a challenge. So how have you overcome this specific challenge?
So we're a very small and lean team, and currently we're still bootstrapping, which has had its advantages. We are considering fundraising at a specific point in time. But what we have told ourselves is that because we're a very lean technology team that is working at supporting 100,000 startups by 2030, which is a very ambitious goal, and we plan to do that without expanding the team aggressively. We also are looking to hire 25,000 African creators. We usually hire from Africa, but we might open that up later down the line. But for now, we want to make sure that we're dealing with unemployment in Africa. We say we're going to be the hardest working set of people. So what we are doing is we're giving away a free trial of 1 week where anybody who's interested in our service can come in and get a sales deck, a pitch deck, or product deck for free, a 10-pager on us, just so that people can immediately see the value, the way the platform works, the way the service works. And it does come at quite an intense cost to us. But the idea is that if we can get at least the next 1,000, 2,000 people trying out the value of the platform, we don't need to say too much, right? You've seen it. It's something that you need. You've seen the quality. You use this. Some of our pitch decks have raised tons of money for people. It's really changed the way people are working. So we have a very aggressive free trial and marketing plan. We have a very aggressive sales plan as well, where, trust me, I introduce myself to about 75 people every day. There's a team that is really powering that to make sure that we're talking to as many people as possible. We're partnering with communities and ecosystems like this podcast. And we're also reaching out to accelerators and incubators around the world so that we can also sponsor their portfolio. So within the next 1 year, we believe that we should at least have gotten about our next 1,000 to 2,000 people to experience the platform and increase our user base quite aggressively.
So as you mentioned, you're offering a free trial, and you also noted earlier on that you offer your services for £200 a month subscription.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Has this price been set specifically with the African customer in mind?
It's actually this low because of the African customer, even though we do this mainly for global startups as well. So the African customer, unfortunately, not everyone can afford it still, because some people are pre-revenue, and it's still quite difficult. But at least after your first 2, 3, 10 customers, you should be able to, put something together. Because in Ghana, where I'm from, this is about 2,700 cities or 2,800 cities a month, which is quite reasonable for a business that might be hiring, 4 people or 5 people. So instead of the budget you would use to hire, one person, and usually when you hire somebody, you're hiring around the price of 5,000 cities or 6,000 cities either way. So it's cheaper than hiring somebody full time, and you get more value for that. So that's kind of the way we've positioned it, so that it works well in Africa, but also works well in the US or in the UK or just anywhere else around the world. Yeah.
So keeping with the theme of customers, which African markets would you say majority or most of your customers come from?
it's not something I'm totally proud of, but it's been primarily focused on Anglophone Africa. So Ghana,
Yeah.
Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, those are the main, Uganda, those are where our customers usually come from. We do have outliers. So we have had customers from South Sudan, we've had customers from Senegal, but we would like to push more into Francophone Africa as well. And then we're also looking at North Africa. The North African market has been a little tough to break into, but
Yes.
we believe that once things get going and we can start hiring more creatives from North Africa, it should also push that, along the line as it goes. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, are there any specific strategies that you've used to scale the business across such diverse markets? I know you said you don't have much presence in Francophone, but you still have considerable presence in Anglophone Africa. So, are there any specific strategies that you've used to get into those markets?
Yes. So primarily we do a lot of partnerships, but the key thing is we shifted from being a founder-led business to a founder-led brand. So I've literally changed my management style, and the company is very much led by the team. So that's working very well. But then in terms of our marketing, a lot of the marketing follows my adventures around the world as well. So I go to these countries, I have speaking events, work with different companies. I train in a lot of incubators and accelerators. My fulfillment manager also runs like a little bit of an accelerator we call it the brand accelerator in Ghana for African brands. So we do a lot of impact work in terms of speaking, training, education, and in turn, when people learn about us and see the work that we're doing and like us, then it drives adoption in that market. And sometimes we don't always go to these markets physically. We also, do virtual engagements as well, and that has tended to drive certain things. On the flip side, also, we do work with larger organizations under a different vertical of our brand, which we call our Premier Studios. So there are companies that would say, "Hey guys, can you send us a proposal?" We've done this with Johnny Walker. We've done this with the UN, with the World Bank. We build the website for the Ghana Stock Exchange. So there are also large brands around the world who do notice our work and go like, "Hey, we want to tap into that," and we price them obviously much more than we would price a startup, but it also allows us to enter those markets and then, interact with their staff, with their teams, and then they introduce us to people as well. So, yeah.
You mentioned that you travel to many African markets to forge partnerships and relationships. So I'm assuming you see a lot of what's happening on the ground. So how would you describe the current state of the creative industry in Africa?
Ooh, okay. So the creative industry in Africa firstly, it's very awake. Okay. I would say it's been awake for a long time, but it's been dormant of knowing its potential, right? But the creative industry right now in Africa knows and understands its potential, at least for some of the countries that I have been visiting, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa. They're really embracing that. They understand it, and they're now pushing more for global distribution. So it's entering a new era where Africa knows its worth. And it's always known it, but just stepping a little bit more into its role, and then is also open to an equal footing and an equal seat at the table regarding distribution and things like that. So there's that. There's also a good loop in terms of Africans or African diaspora giving back to setting up foundations for junior creatives in the industry to be able to accelerate. So I've seen a lot of initiatives, grants, funding, programs that are from the global perspective, from the diaspora or from Africa, that are also picking up, new people, new talent there as well. So it's early days yet. I know we still have quite a bit to go, but the awareness is very strong. The collaboration is very strong. the belief system actually within the young people that I speak to also is very strong, because generally these people are now fully considering the creative path as a formal professional career, whereas most people used to think of it just as a side gig or a pastime or
Yes.
something that so that shift is definitely happening, and I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
Brilliant. You said that the creative industry in Africa is awake and is now realizing its potential. So, what do you think needs to be addressed for creatives to fully realize their potential globally and across the continent?
That's a very layered question. I think a lot of people, especially on social media, are showing how far creatives can go. Even seeing stuff like the Year of Return and the diaspora, just purchasing African art and putting just the placement of African culture in the media has also ensures that people are now fully inspired about how far things can go. I do want to say though that we need to really encourage a lot more of African for African patronage, where there's just something about how comfortable we are to pay a certain price point for creativity from Africa, right? So I must say, even with Workspace, it's almost a 50-50 split in terms of a lot of our clientele are outside Africa. And then, some of our clientele are within Africa. You'd find that to be very interesting, because you would think Africa would be adopting our platform for 80% or 90% of it, right? So I really do want to encourage that if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a founder, if you're a corporate person listening to this podcast, please take your time to invest and pay for creative services well, appreciate them, refer them. I know India has offered us a huge alternative to talent, but again, a lot of our resources are then leaving the continent, right? India, China, Taiwan, there's a lot of countries that are offering services to Africa that a lot of Africans can now competently deliver. And I would just encourage that switch to really, really patronize that. And I think, once the economy is feeding itself, generally we will see a lot more growth, a lot more participation from young people, just to be able to make ends meet and also just make their mark in the world. So, yeah.
Very wise words. So maybe if we look at it from a different perspective, what would you say are the main obstacles that African creators face in gaining recognition or securing high-profile clients?
I think one key gap that we started to tackle as Workspace was just the fact that the business acumen of African creators was generally lacking, right? They're great creatives, they're great at their talents. But then in terms of sales, in terms of customer service, in terms of project management, in terms of quality control, these are things that, if you haven't been trained, obviously, we don't expect people to wave a magic wand and then you just know all these things, right? But let's just say you're a writer and you just came out of the university. No one has taught you how to write a proposal or write a pitch. All you know how to do is write. So I think there needs to be a major investment in equipping the African creative industry with business skills. For us, we are stepping in the gap and we're saying, hey, focus on your talent. We will handle the business element for you, but we still do train them on customer service. We train them on project management, so that way, even beyond Workspace, because we do encourage them to take on projects outside us, even though we do have a fairly large talent pool of a few hundreds of creatives. We encourage them to listen, go out there, be strong, build your own businesses and things like that. And these are the skills that you need. So I think that's like the major gap. They know and understand the creative or the creative talent, but they lack the business acumen to translate that into high potential gigs, consistent income, and strong brands.
So if we look at it from the client's perspective, what does Workspace Global do to help African brands to achieve international recognition through branding and marketing?
So, from the client's perspective, number one, we start off by there's actually an embedded coaching service in there where we will work with you to restructure your value proposition, your go-to-market, just for you to be able to expand the potential of what you think your business can do. So you get that as part of being of our service, and you can also get assigned to a coach for an additional fee. So it just immediately we help them structure, the business model and their roadmap very clearly. Then there's the stuff that they do with their brand, how to position it, the quality of visuals that gets you noticed. Then we also advise on distribution in terms of where to place this. So I personally come from a performance marketing and growth marketing background. So also we're educating our clients on how landing pages work, how Google and Facebook ads, and all the things that allow you to step onto the global front. We then connect them also to other clients in our network, so that they can, let's just say there needs to be a recommendation or to expand on fulfillment. For example, let's say you want to go into the export space, or you want to, cross certain language barriers. We do have some of these resources that we're very intentional to connect people to, so that they can go beyond just their small local market and start to play in other areas. So it's a really wholesome, ecosystem once you subscribe on. Even though we primarily focus on delivering your work, you do have access to that additional support to get you on the global stage.
Would you say that your approach is unique to the nuances of different African markets and how African businesses operate?
It is and it isn't. So because we're a technology business, the consulting element of it does have to be standardized a fair bit. But it's interesting. We've struck the perfect balance between relationships and technology and automation. And so there is a very hands-on approach in terms of building relationships, speaking to, especially challenging things like the trauma of growing up with, for example, African parents, and how that sometimes, and I'm not saying this in general, I'm just saying that in some specific cases, we found that some founders have had very limiting beliefs, because of their upbringing. So we were able to speak to those issues and empower them in a way that they understand in terms of them building their brand. But because we're trying to work with thousands and thousands of customers, there is also a bit of a playbook that we have in the background, to be able to help standardize that. So I'm just saying, I admit we can make it more nuanced, but it is also quite well nuanced also to the different customers that come from our African countries.
Brilliant. So, obviously, without giving away too much information in terms of client names or anything confidential.
Yeah.
Are there any success stories or examples of how Workspace Global has helped a African brand expand their reach or redefine their identity through the branding and marketing work that you do?
Yes. Just earlier today, I was working on our case studies. And if you go onto my LinkedIn profile, Sydney Scott Sam, you'll see that I posted a video of a brand called AfriSocks, which was one of the very early starters of African designed socks that are sold all over the world.
Yes.
I think they are a 6-figure business now.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm very, very proud of them. We designed their sock collections. We designed some of their ads. There's this very ridiculous ad that we
I've
put
seen
together. Of the coffin guys, that did over 1 million views on YouTube. So this is just some of the ways by which we've been able to support quite a few of these businesses. There are a lot of others that we can talk about. Cola markets, some of them have been beating me. Let me just open up our portfolio here, but there are quite a few brands, Jandel, Valerie Lawson, who have really grown to being really, really cool brands. Impact Hub, for example, the one in Accra has become a very strong, formidable brand that, has invited investment from the Netherlands. Like there's a lot of things that are happening because of the brand work that we've done with some of these people. So yeah, we're standing strong on the fact that we do transform people and transform brands to be able to get to that global stage. Yeah.
With the great work that you're doing, you've managed to attract high profile clients, I believe, like the World Bank.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did partnerships such as that come about?
To be honest, those partnerships generally happen through networking.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, it's B2B enterprise method. So it's like direct meetings, direct introductions, and we have the capacity to do that. Those projects do take a lot of time
Yes.
and a lot of bandwidth. And so for every large client that we service, we probably cannot service maybe about 30 to 40 smaller companies because of how intense. It's very hands-on. You're doing meetings every day, like that kind of thing, right? So it's been good. It's really opened us up to that. And if we wanted to prioritize that a lot more, I think we would do very well. We do have our studios specifically for that. So at any point in time that a large brand would come to us, there are people ready to do that, but they're not our priority. That's just what I would say. So yeah, so just as we network, we have a very, very strong track record, over 300 startups, and then also probably about 50 larger brands, especially in Africa, government institutions. C40 Cities, for example, is one of the world's largest sustainability companies that has done. We help them do a lot of their reporting in Africa. There's just been a lot. We have a very strong portfolio, so it's not too difficult once someone gives us that introduction. They see our profile, they see the things that we've done, and we're able to do the work. And usually, we're generally cheaper than companies that they go for in the US or in the UK. So that also works to our advantage. Yeah.
As you said, for every large company that you service, you can't service some smaller clients. You also mentioned that technology is a huge part of your business. So
Yes.
how do you leverage technology to, I guess, enhance efficiency, creativity, and also deliver a top-notch service?
Right. So think about this. The standard agency can work with 3 to 10 companies a month, right? Workspace is poised to work with about 100 to 500 companies a month. Okay. And we're trying to expand that. Somebody would ask, how exactly are you guys doing this? How do you do this without reducing the quality? How do you still deliver almost everything within a 3-day turnaround, right? So there are certain ridiculous statistics that we have or we're working with that only technology allows us to do. Currently, we're able to deliver every single project with an 83% success rate, that the customer would also be happy with that within the first or second revision. That 83% success rate is something that we're trying to get up to 90. And then also we're aiming to deliver everything, including websites, within a 24-hour turnaround, which is something we're working towards in a few years. So just to give you the vision of what we're trying to do now, I can't say too much because this is our bread and butter intelligence, but
Yes.
there are certain elements of the creative process that people have assumed it's only human consulting that can plug those gaps. So we have threw that whole notion out of the window and said, yes, the fact that, it takes human intervention to be able to deliver this element of the creative process doesn't mean it can't be automated and it can't be scaled. The only thing is that it will take a ridiculously long time. So for example, creative direction or the briefing process, right? We spent 2 years of R&D developing multiple use cases of how to predictably know what somebody in the banking industry who wants to start a fintech startup might want, right? So instead of us having to sit with that person for 1.5 hours or 2 hours to understand their work or to wait 1 week for them to put their ideas on paper, we are able to do that within a 7-minute experience using technology and research. So these are just some examples of things that we've done along the creative process to rapidly accelerate and scale the way that we deliver some of these things. And the evidence is there, it has worked. Obviously, we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. Some people just absolutely hated it. But now people understand that, okay, if you're paying $200 for this and you're getting this level of quality of work, fine, let me just put some skin in the game and just work with a little bit of a technology experience for a few minutes, which just makes my life easier. One thing we've realized is that our offices don't have to be open for people to work with us, which is a huge advantage. A founder can literally be sitting in the bathroom or in a garden, right? And simply just, filling forms or doing a few things to give us feedback. And they don't need to wait to speak to anybody to get certain things done. So that's just generally how we're leveraging technology. And that's on the customer side. And also on the fulfillment side with our talent, there are certain things that we've done in terms of our recruitment process, our project management process, and things like that, that rapidly ensure that any young junior or mid-level creative talent who comes into our talent pool can be upskilled to a certain level very quickly and also deliver at our level of quality very quickly. So these are just the ways that we're looking at this. If you want to know more, come and invest in our company.
Brilliant.
We can share more about how we're doing some of these things. So yeah.
Fantastic. I think I'll be in touch soon, Sydney.
I love it.
So you've hit on some key points there. I guess the use of technology in today's business world is essential. It is here to stay. It's no longer an emerging trend. So I guess keeping on the theme of trends, what emerging trends are you seeing in the marketing or branding space in Africa that you're currently excited about and you think people should pay close attention to?
I think the Africanness of marketing has a very large appeal right now.
Yes.
So we don't need to shy away to try and make your business look, like it's from the West, or, you can literally just be an African business using African phrases, African jargon, African visuals, and, it will still be very well embraced, so that's something that I've really enjoyed to see. What else? I think, especially with the rise of Gen Z and, there's a lot of authenticity that is coming to branding where people are showing things that they care about politically, things that there's a lot more authenticity, in terms of what a founder believes or what a team believes that comes through their marketing, that I feel like a few years ago it wouldn't have been very well received. But in Africa now, you can literally just show that there's a brand called I think Dips and Chips. They're not our brand, but I think we supported them with a little bit of coaching in the beginning, and they literally just talk about, I don't want to use the word gluttony, but like basically like indulging yourself, like, just living the soft life, and they have a very interesting way, and most people will go like, oh, shouldn't you be portraying yourself as a healthy company? And they're not trying to, even though it's like African, fried yam and chicken, like made in like African style spices, right? But they position themselves as like an indulgence, and I'm like, it's so nice to see people be able to confidently do that in their marketing, and still be very successful. So yeah, very excited about that.
Thank you for sharing that. So if we move from current trends, look to the future of Africa, where do you see Africa in 5 years' time in terms of how companies will be branded and marketed on the global stage?
Ooh. There's an interesting thing that's happening in Africa right now, and that I want us people to think about. A lot of African businesses are building for acquisition by companies outside Africa.
Yes.
And it's a good thing, but it's also quite dangerous because in terms of control, we may get to a point where in 10, 20 years, all the unicorns from Africa would be controlled externally. And then once there's that level of control, there's a different kind of appeal regarding what the rule of thumb is for marketing, the rule of thumb is for branding. And we may have to operate on terms that are not entirely African, right? Even though I do believe that the consumer market always has its way of being dominant, but it just gets difficult. So I think there's going to be a lot of positivity, but a lot of things that also people need to be cautious of, right? African companies are going to get bigger and bigger and make so much more money and have much stronger brands. We can see even in our music industry, the likes of Burna Boy and Thames, those African products are now fully global products, right? And we've seen that the potential for them is huge. But again, the people who are in charge of distribution are not necessarily all African, like things like that. So there's two ends of that, and it may influence, how marketing and branding is going to be done. But I would say the consumer market is very strong. Our Gen Zs, especially what they did in Kenya, for example, what they've done to like be able to really put a stake in the ground and force like leadership to do better and do right by these countries. Like I do see that there's going to be a lot more confidence from the African consumer market to also, just ask everyone to do right by them. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic to see how that would play out. So yeah, I know it doesn't fully answer your question, but these are just some of my shower thoughts, that I'm putting on the ground.
So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself and Workspace Global in 5 years' time? What influence do you hope to have on Africa's branding, marketing space?
In 5 years' time, we're hoping to have supported about 10,000 businesses. And we're hoping to just be similar to how, people used to have to write letters to send to people in different countries and wait a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks for a reply. And now you can send an email and that is done in 2 seconds. We hope to have changed how much an African founder can dream and say, hey, I can come up with an idea today and next week I will have all my branding assets set up and be ready to play ball, right? So we will have become a force to reckon with, but not as a company, but just more as an innovation like mobile money that just opens up the potential of what the world and the African ecosystem can do. So yeah, that's the way I see it. We would have made a cultural change. We would have really improved access to a lot of things. And we're hoping that also a lot of students and young people can now consider working with Workspace as an alternative career path, because you don't have to go into an office. You work on your own hours. You clock in the number of hours that you want to work. There's a lot of flexibility there. And that's the way I live. That's why I'm able to live in so many different countries. And I would like to also open up that opportunity for our young people.
Brilliant. And I look forward to seeing that happen.
Amen.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Well, one philosophy is that I always view myself as a potential contributor to the problems in my life, right? No matter what they are. And that allows me to take a sense of ownership of everything that's going on. Even if, for example, it's the weather, I do tell myself that I'm upset about the weather outside because I am upset about the weather and not necessarily because the weather has done anything. And so that's just something that has really helped me. But then on the flip side, also, as much as everything matters, nothing also really matters. And that's something that also helps me, that nobody really cares how much money I make or what I achieve. Like, at the end of it, we're all on this earth to serve a specific purpose. I'm Christian. And so my thing is I do everything in service of God. And so it's all okay. Generally how well you do or how well you don't do, it's all fine as well. So that kind of keeps me very well balanced and, being very optimistic about my days. So, yeah.
So Sydney is a man of accountability. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yes.
What a way to end today's conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today, Sydney, and hearing about your incredible journey and the value that you're adding within Africa's branding and marketing space. And looking forward to seeing how things develop and progress for you and Workspace Global in the near future.
Thank you so much. This has been an honor, and thanks for just having me on here.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.